for people as they're deconstructing, as they're reconstructing their faith. Even if they've been in the church a long time, think of yourself as a standard Christian, never deconstructed before, that's okay. But stories or issues that tend to come up that we might not feel super confident about. So last week we had what about atonement? We talked about maybe you're a huge fan of penal substitutionary atonement. Maybe you're not. Is that the only way we thought about the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus through the history of the church? And we found no, there are all these different ways, and I only have time to talk about 6 of them, but before we talked about 9 of them. You can find that online if you're interested. This week, we're moving into our section on Old Testament violence, Tanakh violence. There's lots of different times, of course, that this happens in the story, but there are a few that stand out to people as being particularly disturbing. The Conquest, so-called, is one of those stories. Next week, we'll be doing the flood. How is it that we believe in the God whom we do, and yet God also destroyed everything and everybody except for this one family? How is it that even though we're people who are leery of colonialism, imperialism, genocide, all of these things don't feel good to us, and yet we have this big story that we've heard about in our text, in our very Bibles, and so that's what we're going to talk about. If you're curious, those dates are still wrong, I think, but these are the other things we're going to be talking about. How can we want to be Christians when marginalized groups have been treated by the church and by the Bible in a certain way? What about the Crusades? What about science? All these things are upcoming. If you have interest in those, make sure that you're here for those. But we are talking about the Conquest. We're talking about Old Testament violence. There's a couple different postures that people can take sometimes when we run into texts that we're not super familiar with, or that feel uncomfortable to us in some way. One of the things that you'll hear, or one of the things that feels very easy to say, is don't worry about it. It's probably just myth. We don't have to take everything super literally in the Bible. Just relax. Some of that, specifically that it's okay, we can relax, we can be together, it's going to be all right. That tone I'm here for, just kind of saying, don't worry about it so much, it's all myth anyway, is not really my preferred stance, but it's one that you'll hear sometimes. Another one that you'll hear is whatever story you're worried about, it's just a retelling that isn't about 100% accuracy. It's a reflection of ancient Near Eastern culture, which includes violence, right, in this particular category. So some of that is true. There's, in Genesis, there's these long genealogies, which I'm sure all of us study all the time. They come up in our devotions recently. We've started the year, our Bible in a year plans. Everybody's just been hanging out in the genealogies. You heard it here first. You'll notice there's some odd discrepancies in those genealogies, if you're paying attention, where it says that people lived for 800 years or 600 years, and because the church has not always understood ancient Near Eastern culture, all of a sudden you have this weird pseudoscience, boom, that pops out of nowhere that's like there was more oxygen in the air, and so people lived longer. Maybe you've heard some of them, maybe you're super confused right now, that's fine. What's actually going on is in the culture of Sumeria, you have these things called King's List. I put a picture of the King's List in the Slack. If you're interested, you like archaeology, the outline for the sermon is also in the Slack, if that's your cup of tea. And how those King's Lists are arranged is they would list a king, and then in order to talk about how great their reign was and how important the king was, they would use hyperbole to say that he lived 800 years or 600 years, the same chunks of time that we see in the genealogies in Genesis. And so the point is that the writers of Genesis were borrowing something from their culture to say something about how God's people were walking out their calling on the planet, that they were walking out this image of God as what it looks like to be a good king stewarding God's kingdom. That's the point that they're trying to make. And instead, because we don't know ancient Near Eastern culture, we end up with weird oxygen theories about people who lived 1,000 years. Alas and alack. So that's one approach. It can be a tool in our tool belt that we can use sometimes, but we don't want to rely or use that to kind of dip out of thinking more critically about stories and just say, oh, it's this other culture, don't worry about it. We want to take that tool and then lean in instead. Number 3, sometimes you hear, look, we're followers of Jesus. We don't even have to worry about the Tanakh. We don't have to worry about the Old Testament. Chill out, right? There is some merit to that in that we are Jesus followers. Hebrews says that Jesus is the very radiance of God, right? He's the exact expression of God. So Jesus is not God after God's gone through therapy and done the work and got over his anger management issues, and then we have Jesus. No, Jesus shows us who God has always been the whole time, right? And so we should bring that Jesus theology into our reading of the Old Testament, and not presume, not forget that. If we're confused, how do we live our lives? Do we take up our swords and go slay our neighbors, or do we walk like Jesus? If we're confused about that, walk like Jesus. Thanks, David. Lastly, this is what we're going to do this morning. So often you hear these are big problems, these are insurmountable problems. You'll hear TikToks about them for people who used to be evangelicals and being like, oh, but what about the conquest? Let's slow down and lean in and read and see what is actually in the story and learn what God might have been up to this whole time. So that's the posture we're going to take this morning. Come along, let's see what's going on. We're going to get dropped off to begin here in Exodus, which is before the conquest started. If you're not familiar with the Bible, the Exodus happens after God's people are slaves. They get freed by God, and they cross the sea, and then God meets Moses, the leader of his people at that particular time, and he says this to him. If you're confused about the underlines, that's just where I'm stopping to make sure I don't stop too much. But Exodus 23, if you truly heed the angel's voice and do all that I will speak through him, then I will be an enemy to your enemies. So he says earlier in the context, he's going to send an angel who's going to walk with them, going to lead them. You're supposed to listen to the angel about how they're going to enter the land. Then I will be an enemy to your enemies. I will confine those who confine you. First thing we notice, how does God define what an enemy of his people are? It isn't people who vote differently than them. It's not people who disagree with them. It's not people who chafe in other cultural ways against them, who just can't understand that Yahweh is the king of the universe. It doesn't say any of that. The enemy here, God limits to people who are oppressing you, people who are confining you. So God puts a fence around who are we allowed to think about as our enemies, confining those who confine you. 4, my angel will walk before your face. He will bring you to the Amori and the Chiti and the Perizi and the Canaani. And he says, I will cause a hubbub in all the people wherever you arrive. I will give the back of the neck of all of your enemies to you. I will send out hornets before your face. I will drive out the Chivi, the Canaani, and the Chiti from before your face. I will drive them out before you. So the first thing to notice in that litany is I will. I will, I will, I will, I will, I will, I will, I will. It's not you will. God is very clear when he's giving an instruction to his people about when they are supposed to follow his commands. He'll say, Moses, go and tell the people that they are to do X, Y, Z, and then we have the exact pretty boring rendition of whatever it is, exact repetition, so on down the chain of command. But here, God is saying what he will do. He's the one who's supposed to be doing the quote-unquote conquest. He's the one who's going to take care of the various tribes, the various people groups, that's the Amori and the Chiti and the Perizi, etc. It's him that has the responsibility of working through the problem that there are already people in the land. And what does that involve? Does it say he's going to turn them into a puddle of goo on the ground? No. It says he'll cause a hubbub, so there's some confusion. And then he says, I'll give the back of the neck of all of your enemies. We can read that and be like, oh good, that's way easier to kill people when they're facing the other way. But if you didn't know, until very recently, including in our culture, it was considered massively unethical and dishonorable to kill people who were running away from you, or to shoot people who were running away from you. And so that's also in the biblical text as it is today. And so if someone is running away, it is not honorable to shoot them in the back. And so, what is this text saying? I will give the back of the neck. That means that God's going to send the people out. How is he going to do that? We have the word hornets there. That can also be translated leprosy. If you're familiar with archaeology, there's all these fun mysteries about what happened to the people. Why did everybody leave this area? Disease is one of the reasons that we often postulate that people groups abandon an area. So it could be something supernatural like hornets, or natural like hornets, who knows? Or it could be that God's sending leprosy so that they leave. He's going to leave them. That drive outward is also not violent. It's what's used about Adam and Eve leaving the garden. It's a birth metaphor there, a birth word. He's going to drive them out before them. So if God is going to do all of those things, what is the responsibility of God's people? What is it that they have to do? Their one job, God gave them one job, is to not make a covenant with the people, not to try to relationship build with the people who are being scooted out. Why? There's an odd power dynamic and relationship dynamic if somebody's being driven away and you're trying to say, wait, no, like we can be friends, right? That's confusing. God says you're not going to make a relationship with these people in a covenantal way anyway. That's their one job. The only thing, no murder, no burning, no nothing, do we see any hint of genocide happening here. They will not dwell in your land, lest they make you miss my mark. For if you serve their gods, surely it will be your noose. What's remarkable about that is God here, we don't see him saying, because I am the one God, though he does in other places. This is not a place where he says, for I am jealous, though that word is used famously elsewhere in Exodus. He's concerned about them serving other gods because it's destructive to them. It will be your noose, right? If you get wrapped up in this fertility cult, you get wrapped up in death cults, all these different things. These are destructive patterns. God is always worried about liberation and well-being of his people. And so this is the blueprint. The first time we hear about the people coming into the land that has been promised to them, first time we hear about it, this is what it looks like. God's the one doing it. They aren't to do anything, and that's not violent. The next time we move through this story, we have a whole bunch of stuff happen in a couple different scrolls. Moses dies. A guy named Joshua or Yehoshua becomes the leader of the people, and they keep a festival, and all this stuff happens in Joshua 1-4. And then before anything happens, in Joshua 5, the angel that God talked about showing up does show up. So this is that story. When Yehoshua was in Jericho, he lifted his eyes, he looked. Look here! A man stood opposite him, his sword unsheathed in his hand. Very Final Fantasy, very cool energy, just standing there with your sword out. Yehoshua walked to him. He said to him, are you for us or for our adversaries? He said, no. I am the commander of the armies of Adonai. Now I have come. Yehoshua fell with his face upon the earth. So, very cool vibe, very cinematic. Joshua is about to begin the conquest, about to begin the battles, right? To kick everybody out of the land. That's a story we've heard. But God sends the angel as he promised. And Joshua says, hey, you over there, he doesn't know that he's an angel. Are you with us or against us, right? Classic cinematic line. And the angel's answer is, nope. Nope, I'm not with you or against you. I'm not with you or your adversaries. And that can stand out to us as surprising. We have these songs that we sing, right, called You Are Always on My Side. When we sing that, what we mean is God is rooting for our well-being. He's not like celebrating when we fall down and make mistakes. He loves us. He cares for us. Is a good parent. That's what we mean by that. But sometimes we translate that in our theology to be like, and then whatever I do, God's like, yes, queen, go, slay. As if everything that we do, God puts a stamp of approval on just because we're his people. God doesn't do that. That's why the prophets show up, right? That's why people come and reform the church, right? Because there are these movements that God is not excited about. He's not just automatically, yay, to everything that we do, which is a more safe relationship, right? An insipid person who's always just like, yay, in the background of everything you do is not a good, healthy relationship. Who is that person? What are their values? God is on the side of justice. God is on the side of love. And so he's setting this tone with Joshua to say, if you're not keeping the command of God, if you're not doing what God is commanding you to do, I'm not on your side. I'm on God's side. So that happens in Joshua 5. What happens right after Joshua falls down is the angel tells him to take his sandals off, which is a nice little parallel in the Exodus story. Chapter 3, Moses also, right before the Exodus starts, he's also told to take his shoes off. So it's a little hint from the biblical authors, a hint from the angel that this story is supposed to be about liberation. It's supposed to be about freedom, not destroying and destruction. So that's the end of Joshua 5. The very next verse, we get into the famous Battle of Jericho. The thing that we know, or many of us know, especially if we went to Sunday school, the story goes, the angel tells Jericho, this is what you're going to do. You're going to take these priests. They're going to walk in circles around the city. They're going to do it 7 times. On the last day, they're going to do, and the walls are going to fall down. The angel says, and then you will walk into the city. That's the end of the angel's instructions. The angel doesn't say, and then go murder everybody. So the angel tells Joshua that, and then Joshua goes and conveys that to the people, but he adds a little something to it. So it says, it was at the 7th time when the priests had blown the shofars of Jubilee. Shofar is the word that we play at Yom Teruah. It's a ram's horn. A ram is an image of salvation. We can talk about that later. Deep cut. But it says of Jubilee in chapter 6. Jubilee, we've talked before at Refuge Church pretty extensively. God built this time into his people's calendars in which slaves are freed, land is restored, resources are redistributed, everybody rests, the land rests. All these things are supposed to happen at Jubilee, and God uses that word, shofar, hayuvalim, shows up in the Hebrew. Sometimes it gets edited out of our translations, but they're supposed to blow not just to like war trumpets, not like what we might have seen in movies that tell people to move forward or back. It's specifically the shofars of Jubilee that they're supposed to announce that are only played at Jubilee when they come up to the city. So when the priests had blown these shofars at the Jubilee, Yehoshua said to the people, shout, for Adonai has gifted you the city. The city shall be cherem, and it and all those who are in it for Yahweh. Only this, you all must guard yourselves from the cherem, lest you become cherem. When you take from the cherem all the silver and the gold and the clinking things of bronze and iron, they are holy to Yahweh. They shall go into the storehouse of Yahweh. Okay, there's a Hebrew word in there. Say cherem. Amazing. If you read your Bible Standard Translation, you will notice that they have, in the meme with the giant red button, slammed the word destroy and destruction over and over and over, whether it's this word or other words. They have a whole bunch of words that they've decided mean destruction. There is a word that means destroy, and it's used later in Joshua, but it doesn't appear here. So if we read it that way, in the standard way, the city shall be destroyed, and all those who are in it. You must guard yourself from destruction, lest you be destroyed when you take from the destruction, right? That makes sense. It gives a very dark image of what's about to happen. You can say, well, it's Joshua saying that they should do that, not God. But if we actually crack open our concordance, it's what you pay me the small bucks for. I know you don't have all the concordances with you, but if you look, the word cherem doesn't actually mean destroy. If you look, it's used in all these different contexts that it can't mean destroy for. So the first time it's used is in an obscure passage in Leviticus, and it's talking about gifting a field as a tithe to the priest. And it says that the field that's tithed to the priest is cherem, when you give it to them. Now, if you take that basket with the dollar bill in it and you light the dollar bill on fire and then give it to me, I can't make my car payment with it, right? That's not a very helpful tithe. If you burn down the vineyard or whatever is in the field that you're giving, to the Levites as a tithe. That is not helpful. That would be bizarre behavior. A vineyard takes years and years. An orchard takes years and years. You do not want to do that. It does not make sense to burn it, to destroy it when it's a tithe. It also says the priest's clothing is cherem. When are you supposed to destroy the priest's clothing? That also would be a very different vibe of temple service if all the priest's clothing had been destroyed. It says that the first fruits, before you give them to the temple, they're to be cherem. So again, if you eat all the apples or destroy them or burn them with fire on the way to taking them to give them to God, that does not make any sense. It's not logical, and so different words are substituted in your translations there. The word actually means to be devoted / banned. Cherem means to be devoted or banned. It's the same word if you have any friends who practice Islam, and they say something's haram. Oh, I can't do that, that's haram. It's because it's banned. So if you give a field to the priest, you're not allowed to walk in and keep eating from it and keep profiting off of it. You've given it to them. It's devoted to them. It's devoted to God, and now it's banned. You can't continue to send your workers in to pull from what you've gifted to somebody else. The priest's clothing, you're not supposed to steal and wear on your own. It's haram. It's banned. It's devoted to temple service. It's not supposed to be used by people who aren't priests. The first fruits, you're not allowed to eat it while you're taking it to the temple. It is cherem. It's devoted to the sacrifice. Therefore, it's banned. So if we look here, Yehoshua, we reread it that way. He says to the people, shout, for Adonai has given you the city. The city shall be devoted / banned, i.e., do not touch it. It is God's. God's going to do his own thing with it. You are not allowed to eat of it. You're not allowed to destroy it. You're not allowed to do any of these things. It's for God. You're not profiting. You're not polluting. It's the opposite, right? Only this, you will guard yourselves from the cherem, as in tell yourself, don't take that. I know it's pretty and shiny, but it's not for me. It's cherem. Lest you become banned from the community, right? It's a little play on words. All the silver and gold and clinking things of bronze and iron are holy to God. This suddenly makes sense if you're talking about the context of cherem. They are going in the storehouse of Yahweh. So they're not supposed to take any of the stuff of the city. And like a parent who stops a kid running around with scissors and says, nope, those scissors are going to go with me now. God says, nope, you're going to take all the things that you're tempted to profit off of, and I don't let you profit off of it. You're not going to say, oh, it's so wonderful, this country now belongs to me, and I get to take all of its natural resources to enrich myself. God says, no, not at all applicable for today. God says, no, we're not having that, and you're not allowed to touch it, and make sure that doesn't happen. It's going to be with me. So that is the story that actually happens in chapter 6. We know going on, we have somebody who tra-la-lies through the city and says, I am going to take some of this loot, and I'm going to hide it under my tent, which is not a very good plan. What are you going to do with that black market loot? He didn't really think it through, and God is not pleased. That's the beginning, that's chapter 7, verse 1, says that God was furious with this guy, Achan, because he is not following that it's cherem, it's haram. What happened immediately after that is God's people decide to take up arms, to actually arm themselves against the people of Ai, is usually how it's pronounced, which is kind of funny. Ai, kill Ai. And they have a big battle, and God is so upset that they're not following his directions that he lets them lose the battle, and a bunch of people die, right? Going back to the angel, he says, no, I'm not with you or against you. I'm with God and doing what God has said, and if they choose to take up armaments against the people, God says, okay, that's on you, I'm not helping you out, and they die. And then they make a covenant, which is the one thing. I only gave you one job. And they made a covenant instead of listening to God. So that's the conquest. It's very different than God saying, these people are gross and bad and dirty, and they don't deserve to be in this land, and so you're going to go and exterminate them, and I both command this and sanction it, and you should, right? This is very different. This is a God who says, the way that you will get this city is supernaturally through songs, through worship, through shouting, through music, right? That's not a good military strategy. That's how God commands them to interact, and then Joshua makes sure that nobody is supposed to loot and profit from the conquest, and the people who do are punished by God. When they do try to use armaments, they fail, and God says, nope, not interested. Very different than what we've been told. So, next slide. How does this apply for today? Who absolutely cares? This is very litigious. This is very in the weeds. I hear you. I'm excited that you're here. The first thing that we can notice is whenever we lean into a text instead of away from it, we learn something about the goodness of God. The things that we sang, the first song today is about God's goodness. And when we hear like, well, can God really be good? He seems so violent. Well, let's look at the story and find out whether that's true. When we don't do this, then we don't know what to do when people use our Bible, when they use our stories to promote the works of violence that they're doing in the world. If you didn't know, on January 6, 2021, there were a lot of people who were quoting from this story as they attempted to go do violence at our Capitol. And if we don't know what's actually in the story, we're like, okay, that doesn't seem like something Jesus would do, but I guess it's in there. You're going to go storm and tear things down and etc. If we've actually read the story, we can have something to say, a way to respond to the Christian nationalism in our world, instead of just being like, the way of Jesus, and kind of backing out the door slowly, right? And if we don't do this, we end up becoming more like the people of violence over time, right? Because if we don't know, actually it's in here that God is never about that particular strategy, never about walking out his aims and purposes in that particular way. As we become more and more defensive, we can become more and more violent, right? In our response, with our own attitudes, with our own words, with our own strategies. But if we're marinated in what the word actually says, we know that the way God makes change is supernaturally, through worship, through listening to his words, even when they don't make sense, and walking out his purposes that way. What about the conquest? What can we learn from this particular story, other than just this hermeneutic of, wait for it, actually reading the scripture? Well, first, it tells us that God is on the side of love and justice. He is not a vapid cheerleader. Not all cheerleaders are vapid, of course. We don't love misogyny in this house. However, so often it's easy for us to say, I know the right things. I know the good theology. I've read this book. I've listened to this person. I know the things. And so God is with me and he's against you, right? Which is ironic because the teachings of Jesus that we say that we're following tell us to love our enemies, tell us to pray for those who are oppressing us, tell us to forgive and heal our enemies. And so if we are not doing that, God is not still clapping and cheering us on and saying, yes, go Refuge Church, you got it. God still loves us and cares for us and attends to us and nurtures us. He doesn't break relationship with us, but sometimes coming back to the path means coming back to the path and saying no and repenting to a certain way that we were doing things and resuming the call of God, the aims and purposes that he has revealed as we seek to put the world back together, starting in ourselves and our families, in our church, in our community, and branching out from there. So that's our first thing. The second thing is we cannot ignore part of our calling for the sake of another part, right? So Joshua, when they did take up swords against Ai, probably were saying to themselves, we got to do this. God has told us that this is our land. God's revealed plan is for us to be in the land. We're just helping things along, right? They ignored the part where God said, this is my work, not your work, right? King David, he was anointed king, but he waited and waited and waited and waited for God to make him king. He did not kill Shaul. Anytime that he even embarrassed King Saul, he felt terrible about it. He repented both to God and to Saul. So we want to walk like that. We want to say, God has given us this command to love the marginalized, to care for people who have been pushed to the edges, to help our community heal and come back together. that means that we also have to embrace the methods of God along the way, which can look different than we might want them to. It doesn't involve yelling at people on the internet. It doesn't involve mocking people and using derisive language and scorn, right? The calling of God is good, and also it needs to be made and pushed forward with the strategies of God, with the methods of God. This can look a bunch of different ways in our everyday life. So sometimes some of us cherish the practice of Shabbat. We love to Shabbat. We love to get to Shabbat. And sometimes you might have a spouse who's at home, who stays at home with the kids and works there. And then the spouse who works comes home and says, it's my Shabbat. Can you keep the kids away from me? It's like, when does the person who stays at home works with the kids get to Shabbat? And the person who works outside the home says, well, some other day, which I'll be working. So, you can just Shabbat with kids. So on and so forth. We took a good thing, we took a good practice, and we made it an oppression of the other person in the home. We're not fighting for the flourishing of everyone in the home. Same thing with the work. We can say, God has given me such an important good work to do. I take care of people, whatever your particular occupation might look like. And so, in the process of prioritizing that, we can be unkind to our children, our spouses, the people around us. You just don't understand. My work is so important. I need to be able to do it right. So this problem shows up in lots of different ways in our life, even if we are not currently walking into a land that God is giving us in a literal, metaphorical way.